Story by Don Pelicano. This wasn't something that happened in an abandoned place or at night, where something creepy could have easily occurred. It was the complete opposite, actually. I was at the beach with a group of friends on a nice day. It wasn't too crowded, but there was still a decent amount of people there. Families, groups of teenagers and couples walked up and down the beach. The usual beach kind of ambiance, if you will. The kind where someone always has a Bluetooth speaker playing music, and there's usually 3 or 4 different songs playing at once, depending on where you are. Kids yelling and people talking against the waves crashing down on the beach. Heavenly. We were there for a while, and we had already set up our towels and talked about random things. I can't really remember what we talked about, because nothing really stood out to me until that moment. But all of a sudden, everything went quiet. Not visually, because I looked around and nothing seemed to change. No one seemed to notice, because people were still walking up and down the beach, but everything just went silent. The music from the Bluetooth speakers went off, and people stopped talking. To be clear, this was instant, abrupt. The waves weren't making any sound, and the wind had stopped as well. Beaches are never silent, even if people stop talking. There's always some sort of sound, whether it be the waves, birds, or the wind. I remember looking around because my brain automatically assumed something was wrong, and that everyone else just didn't notice. I don't know what I expected to see, but nothing seemed to be out of place. People were still walking up and down the beach, and someone a little ways away looked like they were talking to someone else. There were kids running up and down the beach as well. Nothing looked frozen or weird in any way. It was only the sound that was gone. Almost immediately, I looked over at my best friend, and we made eye contact at almost the exact same time. I could tell by the look on his face that he had noticed the same thing I had. Neither of us had to say anything, not that we could even hear each other speak if we had. It's hard to tell how long it lasted, because if someone were to tell me it lasted for 40 seconds or 40 minutes, I would believe either version. Time had lost meaning, and it's very tricky to place it into words. All I think of is Gandalf's retelling of his experience after the Balrog, but then all sound, for me and my friend, flooded back into us at once, again instantly. Conversations were suddenly there, and music was playing from different Bluetooth speakers. The waves and wind made their usual blissful sounds. Life resumed as normal, and my best friend and I started questioning the others. Something like, "Did you guys hear that?" We looked at everyone, expecting them to understand. They just looked at us like we were crazy. "What are you guys talking about?" The silence. We told them, and they said that nothing had happened. They said that everything had been normal, and that music had been playing the whole time, no auditory anomalies. And that is what made us even more uncomfortable than the event itself. If it had happened to everyone, weird, but a clear thing that happened. At least one of my friends experienced it, or I'd truly feel insane. So, going off the idea that we live in a simulation, the truth of that is, simulations depend on coding and servers and specific processes. Some are individualized, tokenized, you could even say, and they depend on specific flow functions. So you have one process involved for sound, another for the tactile feeling of touching an object, or just feeling the wind on your skin, or the heat of the sun, the scent of the salty air at the beach, warmth or heat and aggravating nonsense of sand, and all that stuff, and visual as well. So all our senses, there probably are different processes involved in handling them. You have a master server and then subset under them that handle individualized functions. That's my guess anyways. Seems more efficient and protected. So if one fails, they probably won't all fail. Sometimes they might, like in the hiccup where the whole sun seems to vanish. That is what is happening there. The master server seems to fail. But sometimes maybe just specific ones do, and only in a localized area, because I think that the way to handle it is You don't have a server running on just a single device, you could say. They're compartmentalized, and the area of the game world itself is split into chunks, and different servers handle different chunks. So if one fails, it's not the whole server that crashes, because that would obviously be pretty bad. So in short, I think that you experienced, along with your friend, in just your localized area, the input from that one process of sound was just gone. It failed until it restarted or was switched to a different handling server. Probably happens quickly, but again, we don't know if there's a time delay between the real world and ours. I mean, maybe it took hours or days in the real world to fix. And at least you have a quack standard with your friend, or maybe a seagull standard in this case. Welcome, I'm Paul. This little fella is Dave. He is my co-host. Well, really runs the show, I guess. Today I have 7 glitch in the matrix and paranormal stories for you. Let's get to it. Story by Kame1770. Lost on the Dance Floor. I am still none the wiser as to what happened, and it has been long enough that I have given up trying to rationalize it. It was in a club years ago, where I was dancing with a girl I had met that evening, which was common enough for me. She had been throwing herself quite enthusiastically onto my neck, giving me kisses and then pulling away to continue the dance, her arms tossing up over her head, and her body swaying sensually from side to side, all signs that she was having a good time and that I was too. She caught my silver Saint Christopher pendant, which I had worn for many years, and which was a meaningful possession to me, as it had been a gift from someone who had since died, and yanked it right off my neck. I saw it fly across the floor, a glinting blur in the dim club lighting, before disappearing amongst the writhing masses on the dance floor. We stopped dancing immediately and set off searching, both of us crawling on hands and knees at one point or another, no doubt making many other people think that someone was searching for a lost contact lens. It was quite a long search, but I think we looked properly. She felt so awful about it, though it was an innocent accident. And I felt awful because the pendant meant a lot to me, so much so that it might as well have been stolen. We looked for a while, but eventually we had to give up. The sticky floorboards of the club, the gloomy lighting, the hundreds of other people all made it near impossible. Any hopes of recovering it were in vain. Even through this painful accident of hers, I still took the girl home with me that night. The following morning I got up, intending to put my jeans on, and instead felt something in the little pocket on my Levi's, an almost useless thing that people hardly ever use save to put loose change in. In any case, I reached in without thinking and pulled out my pendant. I simply sat there for a moment, eyes fixed on the little clasp that had not opened, for it had been ripped from my neck the previous night, tossed across a room, and now here it was in the palm of my hand, a small pouch barely the size of a matchbook, and I had not even put anything in it. She apologized profusely that morning, genuinely distraught over having taken it and then losing it, so I know for certain that she had not put it there, as she would not have apologized for something that she knew was returned to me. I had not seen her go searching for it again after we had given up, nor had I seen her put it anywhere, least of all on the inside of my pocket, and she was as surprised as I when I found it. I have spent much time since then thinking over what could have possibly happened, but I have found no answers as of yet. I wear the pendant to this day. The clasp is the same one that had opened that night in the club, and sometimes, usually when I'm getting dressed, I start to ponder on if my pendant has actual magical properties. Story by OK Top 7445. 1 perfect second. Everything below comes from my own memory, and I'm sharing it because I've never found a satisfying explanation. I'm almost 40 now, but this happened in 2002 when I was 15. It was during summer classes before the new school year. We were in an advanced math class preparing for high school entrance exams. The school building was quiet because only our class was there. As a kid, I was actually someone who got distracted easily in class and often daydreamed. Our math teacher was explaining a problem that I found incredibly interesting. I became completely absorbed in it. Looking back, it was probably the only time in my life when I felt 100% focused during a class. It almost felt like nothing else existed except the blackboard, the teacher, the math problem, and me. Then, without any warning, my vision suddenly changed. I didn't go blind, but I couldn't see the teacher or the blackboard anymore. Instead, my entire field of vision became a fast-moving, colorful scene. The closest comparison I can think of is a sci-fi warp speed effect with a deep blue background and countless tiny red, green, and blue lights sweeping rapidly across my vision. My first thought was, what's happening? Why can't I see the teacher or the blackboard? Then something even stranger happened. My body suddenly moved on its own. I didn't consciously decide to duck. Instead, my whole upper body suddenly bent down until my head was below the desk. It was a big movement. Only after I had already ducked did I think, why did I just do that? At that exact moment, a small piece of chalk flew over my head. After class, I found out that a student sitting 2 rows behind me had secretly thrown it at the back of my head as a joke. No one warned me. I never heard him throw it. I never turned around. The only thing I remember is seeing that strange visual phenomenon first, and then my body ducking before I consciously understood what was happening. For the rest of the class, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why did my vision suddenly change? Why did my body move before I seemed to consciously decide to move? And why did it happen at exactly the right moment? Nothing like this has ever happened again. This is autonomous ultra instinct. Can't quite say it as well as Jason Douglas, the voice actor for Beerus in Dragon Ball Super. If you've never seen it, no spoilers, just to say that it's epic. Begin from the beginning, the OG Dragon Ball. Go back, watch it. Dragon Ball is so funny, especially at the beginning, but it blends funny and serious, and as it goes on, it gets more serious, but insanely epic, beyond anything you could imagine. I would say to watch it with the English dub. I just think it's better, but I grew up with that, so I know people really like the Japanese voice actors, and that's not wrong. It's just not what I grew up with, and I like to be able to hear the intonation of a voice actor's voice, how they bring their own spin to it. And yeah, some of the dialogue is changed, so I know it's not a perfect recreation, but I just grew up with it. I prefer it. I like the soundtrack, especially in the Bruce Falconer soundtrack in Dragon Ball Z. Anyways, total tangent there. Back to the story. I think we have a certain sense in us. This might not even be a glitch per se, but you ever find yourself dodging things on instinct? Or like how sometimes I'll catch Dave when he falls off. It's not me thinking about it, and that's what autonomous ultra instinct basically is. It's just a technique where your body moves before you have time to think. And that's pretty cool. I think that can happen with our own subconscious picking up on small details. Maybe the sound of the person throwing the chalk, their arm moving through the air. Subtle things that may not always be true, but your body just reacts before you realize it. Now, the whole warp field effect and all that maybe does imply more of a glitch. Your guardian angel didn't want you to be hit on the head with chalk and lose aura in the classroom, which if that is the case, fair enough. Props to him. Also, there's something weird. I am a very logical person, I think, but I hate math. And math is just pure logic. Maybe it's just too dry. It's too abstract. And I like to think about ideas and abstractions, but I guess it's the tool set rather than the final destination. Kind of like cooking. Or I love to eat, but I don't really enjoy cooking. Kind of like that. Even though, cooking and all its techniques and tools does result in producing good food. I just want to eat the food instead. I'll leave someone else to do the monotonous grunt work. Story by Wrong Friendship 411. The Call from Sleep. I've always had weird, vivid dreams. I've had a lot of trauma in my life, so I have nightmares pretty much every night. On this particular night, I fell asleep on the couch before work. I had a very vivid dream that I was in my apartment, living with my older brother. He was leaving to go to work and taking the trash out with him. He walked out the door, and I locked it behind him. Maybe 2 seconds later, there was a knock at the door. Thinking it was my brother, I opened it. These 3 big men forced their way into my apartment and started beating me up, screaming at me about how my brother owed them money or something. I panicked and pulled out my phone to call for help. The first number that came up was my father's, so I dialed it. Immediately, one of the men grabbed my phone from me, screaming, and smashed it. As the phone smashed, I woke up, absolutely terrified. My roommate had come out of his room and had been making food in the kitchen. He said I was freaking out in my sleep, so he woke me up. Now, like I said, I have nightmares constantly, and I don't normally wake up feeling this scared. It also wasn't a particularly bad dream compared to the stuff I normally dream of, but for whatever reason it left me shook. I ended up getting up, pacing around, going outside and chain-smoking multiple cigarettes and taking a couple shots of whiskey. All not normal of me, but I just felt pure terror over that dream. I eventually calmed down enough to go back to sleep before I had to work that night. I fall back asleep and everything is fine. My alarm goes off for work. I was working the night shift, and I notice that I have a bunch of missed calls and text messages from my parents. Thinking something's wrong, I call my mother. She starts asking me if I called my dad earlier. She says he was at work when he got a call from me. He answered the phone, but all he heard was a man screaming, a smashing noise, and the line going dead. I told her about the dream, and we could never figure it out. I checked my phone, and I hadn't placed the call, and he did get a call from my number around the same time I was having the dream. My roommate assured me that I was sleeping. He woke me up, and then I was awake, so I didn't sleepwalk and call anyone. I also didn't tell anyone about the dream until that night, after my mom told me about the call and what they heard. The thing is, this isn't the first weird dream thing that's happened to me. It's just the most memorable. Even rewriting this is making my hair stand up, giving me that creepy and terrified feeling again. If anyone can explain this, please let me know. I've been trying to figure it out for years now. This is a heavy and visceral kind of story. I do have a fear, I guess maybe not a phobia, just it's a natural fear of people breaking into my home and harming me or someone else or trying to take my stuff. I think most people have that fear. Maybe not. It's not exaggerated. It's just a natural level. Reading this story does you imagine it happening to you, and it's not pleasant in any regard, even though in your case it was just a dream, but still. To what extent can dreams become reality? I mean, in our brains, you might even feel some trauma from it, even though, again, it was just a dream. Or was it? What is going on with the ability to call your father from a dream? We know that ghosts or souls, echoes of souls, can interact with cell phones, electronics. So maybe there's some kind of play going on there where your soul connected through your phone to call your dad. But then how the soul even replayed the sound effects from your dream as like a holodeck simulation replayed over the phone somehow. It's a pretty cool event, but yeah, I can't fully explain it. I just think that obviously dreams have more going on than we realize. They interface with our soul, which is the player, the entity that is moving this meat suit, which is otherwise just a material force in the simulation. Quite the spark of life there. Story by Monica. Good night, Dad. My dad died suddenly. It happened while he was in the basement working on his computer. This detail had become permanently etched in our memories because the place felt special to us ever since that day, and we could no longer visit it the same way. Not that anyone spoke of it much, but for a few days, the place was thick with the weight of his memory. You see, everything had been so hectic in the days that followed. People kept coming, calling and bringing us casseroles and flowers. It was all so odd. We kept having moments where everything would seem back to normal, only to remember that it was all because Dad had passed away. It was a few nights after his death that my brother decided to sleep in the basement. I am not sure what compelled him there, since none of us had been sleeping well for days and no one had a particular schedule. According to him, he had woken up around 3 a.m. and decided to go up to the second floor to go back to sleep. On his way there, he had to pass Dad's old computer room. As he walked by, the computer suddenly turned on. At least, that is what he said. From his description, it seemed that the machine was only partially on since it only glowed as he passed it. What makes this an interesting tale is my brother's reaction, which was the epitome of calmness and humor. He did not run upstairs in fear. He only glanced at the room and said, "Good night, Dad," before proceeding to his room. I found this hilarious, and even till today, it remains one of my favorite stories. After all, the man was dead. What was the computer meant to do? Maybe it had malfunctioned, judging by the weird timing. Perhaps the mouse had somehow been pressed, and Windows decided to open automatically, but no one knew. It all seemed so odd that something would happen just a few days after Dad's death. Little did we know that this would only be the beginning of the haunting experience. A few days later, something utterly bizarre occurred, and this time we were all present for it. It had all started because people had decided to send us flowers. Some had brought us bouquets right away, while others had sent them to our house. We had become so overwhelmed by the gesture that we decided to put them all together in the dining room since there was no other space to put them. What greeted us when we entered the house was a beautiful display of floral arrangements that the people around us had chosen to express their sympathy. I was in the kitchen when Mom suddenly called us all. She seemed to desire our attention, and her reaction suggested that something weird had occurred. Hurriedly, we all arrived in the dining room where she was waiting alongside the bouquets. Mom was outside the dining room looking up at the light fixture above. It was swaying, and I mean violently. The chandelier had begun to move from side to side like crazy. It had become so wild that it had started shaking the table below it, sending the dishes and glassware nearby rattling. It was as if the thing was about to free itself from the ceiling and smash to the ground. No one was close enough to the thing to stop it. No one had even touched it. We all stood there in the kitchen, watching the mess unfold. I don't recall anyone saying something or asking what was going on. Perhaps they were stunned that something odd was happening right before their eyes. I was too, actually. That's why we were all transfixed by the chandelier. Your mind takes a while to process what is happening. There's a lag period. And so we stood there watching the thing bob up and down for around 30 seconds. That is my guess for how long it lasted. It wasn't just a few seconds or minutes. It is long enough for you to start questioning what the cause of such a disturbance could be, and if it was about to come crashing down on the table. Soon enough, it eventually stopped, and we all stood in utter disbelief. It was my mom who broke the silence by saying, "Well, your dad did always hate flowers." That got all of us laughing. I think that was the moment the whole haunting thing broke for us. That was one of the weirdest experiences we had had in the wake of Dad's death. We had been so stressed dealing with the wake and all the calls and flowers. Having this occur a few days after Dad's death when we were already in the deepest part of our grieving felt cruel. My brother always retells a computer story the same way, giving us some much-needed comic relief. "I only wish Dad a good night," he says before departing to my room. Whenever the family starts discussing the chandelier, someone always brings up my mom's comment about Dad hating flowers, and somehow everyone always seems to get to the same page, laughing about the whole thing. It was a weird phase, but it defined us for a short while, and even till today we like to remember it fondly. After all, it was an odd occurrence, but it came just at the right time to lift our spirits.
It's hard for me to handle and process death in my own life. I haven't lost many people. Really, it's just my grandma that was close to me a few years ago, and that is very sad. But how you try to approach it, like For you losing your dad, that's even closer, much closer. You know he would want you to go through life and press on with a sense of hope and even humor about it. And that's kind of how I feel if I did die. Putting all aside the ghosts and quantum immortality, let's just say none of that's real. It's all fake somehow. Every story is fake. And we just die and that's it. Or maybe there's heaven or something. But for the purposes of interacting with people in the universe, that's over. It's cut off. Even then, I would still want people to be happy in my presence. So, the physical manifestation of it that's left over, the husk. And I think at my wake or funeral, I would want, don't worry, be happy. Maybe it feels tacky. I don't know. But then again, it's my wake, so who cares? I think you can dictate that kind of stuff in your will. Can you? That's interesting. I wonder what the craziest song played at a wake was, if you can dictate that kind of thing. But yeah, the point is, handling it and grief and all that, there's no one way to do it, and it's different for everyone. So your family dealt with it in a way that felt both cruelly induced to you, but also you could move on from it with a sense of humor. So I think how it interacted with you eventually is a positive thing, even though it's so weird in so many ways, right? Story by Rickday44, The Most Normal Ghost Story.
It was a number of years ago now. I want to think it was when I was in my 20s, though the precise year is hazy. The conversation, however, is not, or rather, the impression of it is not. I remember the location in enough detail for a start. There was a normality to the encounter. That is to say, there were no unearthly omen-like occurrences. It was just a conversation with a woman 5 feet away from me, who, if she was an actress, could certainly have passed for one. 5 feet is a distance at which one may observe the subtleties of human nature, the characteristic mannerisms, the glances sideways when one is thinking of something to say. We spoke for several minutes, not a polite exchange of greetings upon meeting, but something more substantial, a proper conversation. I am unable to recall the precise subject of the discussion, though I have tried to jog my memory, and failed each time. The inability to remember this is a chief contributor to my unease, because I feel I would be able to reconcile a good deal of the mystery if only I could recall something tangible. A detail that would prove this was not or was something special beyond the norm. I could tell you with absolute certainty that nothing at all seemed amiss or felt in any way strange to me during those few minutes of conversation. In fact, I do not think I have ever felt so utterly certain of the reality of another person's existence. There was nothing to make me suspect, nothing for me to second guess in any way, shape, or form. The woman standing before me radiated normality. You understand the kind of normality that comes with people when you are face to face with them. You do not think about it. It is an implied fact that they are genuinely there, and you are interacting with them in real time. In that respect, I had the most bizarre sense that I had already experienced this very conversation with this very person already. I think that is the closest approximation to how I felt at the time. A few weeks passed, or perhaps even a few months. It was not long when I stumbled across some conversation that made me realize she had passed away. But she had passed away 15 years before I supposedly met her. I laughed off the encounter when I first heard the news because it was impossible to think otherwise. I felt like there had to be some sort of conflation of events, some misunderstanding somewhere. I was desperate to find something to explain this away because I did not want to believe it, not at all. Perhaps there had been another woman with the same name? I investigated this possibility, as it seemed the most plausible reason for the mix-up, but again I found nothing. The details were all there. I am quite willing to concede to the possibility that I imagined the entire memory to protect reality from insanity. But I have rewatched the conversation in my mind's eye dozens of times since then, picking out the details until I find some minuscule thing I may have misremembered that could explain it all. I think it is quite possible that the conversation was not as long as I thought it was, since I know how our minds work to prolong the memory of an enjoyable conversation. You add flourishes, embellishments. The whole experience stretches out in your memory longer than it possibly could have in reality. I think that even if I concede to all of these possibilities, I am still left with the lingering doubt. If you accept that I did talk to this woman for several minutes and found her presence entirely unsurprising, you must concede that I could not have talked to someone who was supposedly dead for the last 15 years. How does an incredibly mundane conversation turn out to be with a dead woman 15 years gone? I think that if I had some sort of supernatural encounter when I was talking to her, I would feel a little more satisfied with myself regarding the whole affair. As it stands, I have no resolution, no neat ending to report. I have told this story to several people over the years, and I always feel a little strange when I do, because there is nothing to explain. I do not even know what happened later in that conversation when I supposedly looked away from the woman. I do not remember her walking away or me looking away. It might as well have been one of the other conversations I had with someone where I did not look at them for more than a few seconds the whole time. If the ghost had flickered before me, if something had happened to signify she was not really there, I would feel more at peace with the whole situation. As it stands, it feels like a sci-fi experiment gone wrong. The memory of her was implanted. It is not something that haunts me constantly, but it is something that will come up every few years or so and bite me in the gut unexpectedly. It always seems to be when there is nothing particular to trigger it either. I get this strange feeling in my stomach, like that first moment when I understood what had happened to me. The realization that I had experienced something utterly bizarre and inexplicable, and that feeling has not gotten any less unpleasant even decades later.
Story by Shut Up, I'm Eating Dirt. Gone without a sauce.
It was about 3 years ago. I lived with my roommate, and that's it. Nobody else. I don't really remember what she was cooking that night, because it wasn't really anything special, but she needed a can of stewed tomatoes for it. She could have been making pasta, or maybe chili, but it required a certain kind of a can of tomatoes. I remember that, because that is a specific, stupid little detail that involves the whole fiasco of an event that happened that night. The return of the tomatoes, if only. The can simply vanished. She was cooking, and I was in the other room. She got the can of tomatoes from the pantry and put it on the kitchen counter, and then it was simply gone. At first, we both blamed the other, but that died down quickly. So we began to do what any other responsible, sane person would do when a can of tomatoes disappears off their kitchen counter. We looked for it. Just a can of tomatoes, right? Stupid little mystery that will be solved in a day and forgotten about in a week. But it simply didn't show up anywhere. It wasn't behind the fridge or near the stove or tucked under the counter or in the trash can or back in the pantry where she originally got it from. We never found it. Ever. We both continued living in that house for another few months, and every once in a while, when one of us was cleaning, they would think about the tomatoes and wonder if it would magically appear somewhere. This was a 28-ounce can, not small. We did a complete clean out of the kitchen more than once, pulling out all of the appliances and cleaning behind them. We looked and looked and looked and looked some more, but still nothing. We moved out of that house eventually, and when we did, we completely emptied it out, tossing out everything that was of any use to us, and taking everything else with us out of the house. So when we did that, you can imagine the pit in our stomachs when we had full confirmation that those tomatoes ceased to exist from the material plane of existence. My roommate and I still talk about it sometimes, joke about it. How the house ate the tomatoes, or something like that, we say.
I think my favorite has to be the Neo dodging the chalk. It's a small story, but it's really cool. It speaks to the hero, the boy in me that wants to be a superhero. We all want that. I mean, I grew up with Goku, breaking your limits, fighting to protect others and defeat the bad guys. It's good stuff. Now let's get to the jokes. I have a meeting at the bank later, and if it's a success, I will be out of debt and own everything I have now. I'm so excited I can barely put on my ski mask. It's a unofficial meeting. If I bought an axe from Finland and had it shipped to Canada, I would have a foreign axe sent. I found out that the library is the tallest building in town. It has the most stories. Why haven't aliens visited our solar system? Well, the reviews all said 1 star. We got review bombed. My wife left me because I'm too insecure. No, wait, she's back. She was just getting coffee. I foresee a prophetic vision. More glitches up here next to Dave. Check him out, and I'll see you next time.